A typical common problem that people have, and one that I had myself when I started working on beauty images, is evening out skin tone color. And that sounds like something that can be really difficult, and just thinking about it gives a lot of people headaches. And I'll be honest with you, it's something that I took a long time to learn because I had a hard time seeing color. I'll be honest, I'm not the best when it comes to identifying different colors by eye. It's not something that it comes naturally to me. Do you know how some people are just gifted with how they see color? When you have people like Eric Almas or even Danny Diamond, where they have a innate sense of what color should be and the feel that comes out with it. It's something that I had to learn. It's something that I had to play with and understand. But I needed something quicker for me to not only identify wrong color when it comes to skin, but also fix it in a way where it's painless. And I wanted to provide something that's easy for you as somebody who's like me that needs to fix color when it comes to skin. Because with beauty, as a base, one of the most important parts of beauty images is making sure that there's consistency with not just your healing work or your skin work or your evening out of lighting, but number two, the evening out of color. Because that separates people who truly understand beauty from those who have a hard time trying to get there. And I want you to get there quicker than you would at the moment. So, with that being said, I want you to take a look at this particular image. Again, provided by Jennifer McIntyre. And one issue that typically happens when you shoot beauty, or even two models together, in this instance, making it a host of problems for us, is that you have a varying range of skin tones. For example, one common area that I've noticed generally is on the neck. You see that the level of saturation is different. The color is different. It seems to be this like green, orange kind of color that's not harmonious with the rest of the skin tone. For example, on the shoulder, you see that there's a varying range of luminosities and skin tones that just don't mesh well with the face. And it doesn't mesh well with the shadows. It doesn't really do anything for me. And I need to fix that. As a retoucher, if I don't fix that, it's not gonna pass. It's gonna come back to me and they're gonna ask me to fix it. Also, when you talk about different models, you also have the same issue here on the left side with the model here, but her neck is less saturated. Even the forehead itself, there's more saturation happening just by looking at it. Now, let's say you couldn't differentiate levels of saturation and levels of color, but you know it's off, and you know it's off because you know it just doesn't match. How can we fix that? Well, if you take a look at this example here, you see everything has been fixed. And when I go before and after, and that's what I'm going to show you today, is how to fix that in a couple of ways, but most importantly, doing it through the RAW processor, number one, because doing it through the RAW processor, as mentioned before, you have this incredible amount of data and information that's present, and you want to take advantage of it when possible. Because just like exposure, once you import this file into Photoshop, you don't have as much leverage. And the leverage that you do have is really forced. These adjustment layers are like emulations, where when you're moving colors around, it does the best job possible. But when dealing with the raw data, you tend to take leverage of as much information as possible naturally. The shift of colors is organic. The shift of exposure is organic. You have the data there because it's actually there. It's not trying to be forced out of a file like doing it through adjustment layers. And you don't get as many problems. So it's a path of least resistance, which is why I'm going to talk about the raw data first in that method before going to Photoshop. Now, the first thing that I want to mention is this technique is only available and possible through Capture One because they have the tools in order for us to be able to do this. It's something that I do often because I don't have to worry about it later in Photoshop. I can do it now and then continue my whole process in Photoshop. And usually it's not a big deal because these colors that I'm trying to fix are offending colors and I don't need to worry about trying to save those later for Photoshop. So let's get into it, now that we talked about the whole theory behind it. Now, first thing first, the end goal here, as I mentioned, is getting to something like this, where we have homogeneous colors going through both of the models, but the makeup itself has stayed the same, the eye color stayed the same, and we brought back some of the blush on the cheeks, and having that full control. Now I'll do the same thing with the eye makeup, and I know that over here you see the eye makeup is also changed, and I'm going to show you how to fix that as well. So let's take a look at this before file. Now with the before file, we're going to fix not only the neck, but bring back some of the colors that are similar with the lips as well, so that anything we fix is not going to impact the areas that we want to keep the same. So how do we do this? Well, step one, I'm going to go into my local adjustment brush. And again, I mention this because only in Capture One is this possible. With other programs, they don't have these tools just yet. So in case you don't have this program, I would encourage you to try it out as well. But more importantly, in case you aren't able to, or you feel like you want another method, I'm going to show you that as well. And that'll be done through Photoshop. So first thing first is I'm going to be working primarily in this palette called the Color Editor. Now, if you have Capture One 9 or 10, you should be safe because it has the Color Editor inside this local adjustment brush section. Typically, the local adjustment brush is going to be somewhere here in the Color tab. But instead of doing that, I'm going to do it over here because this Color Editor has masking available with it, making it much easier for us and more identifiable because we're already used to masking. So once everything is done, I can just come back and quickly mask some areas without trying to really fiddle around with colors and pinpointing what I want to change. I'm going to change everything and then mask away some of those features. First thing first, let's go and set up a layer. And this layer is going to be called Color Fix. Now, if you're completely unfamiliar with this program, I would encourage you to check out my Capture One tutorial as well, available on rggedu.com. And also, more importantly, is I'm not going to cover everything because we just don't have the time to talk about all these tools, but there are other tools that really help as well. Now, with the layer that we just made, we want to first and foremost right-click and invert mask. The reason why we did that is if you think in Photoshop terms, a layer usually starts out without a mask. In Capture One or any other program, for example, it usually starts out not visible if we make any adjustments. And the reason for that is simple. Let's say in theory, I start by default and leave it to however it was with the new layer set. If I start making adjustments to white balance, you won't see anything happen because all it's doing is it's loading the brush so that whenever I do start brushing, it's going to change the white balance as I work. So as you see, only then does it change and apply the settings that I did. Now, let's undo that really quick. Command Z. And I'm going to reset my Kelvin. If I start with the mask inverted, like I mentioned before, what will happen now is I'm going to see the shifts that happen by default. The reason why this is important, and the reason why I'm working backwards, is I want to see all the colors corrected first, and then hide away the areas that I don't want affected. So, now that I have an inverted mask, I'm going to go into my color editor, and then click on my skin tone tab. The skin tone tab, again, is just like you'd imagine. It fixes skin tones, and is specifically designed to target skin tone colors and anything that you want to even out. I'll click on my color picker here. Now the goal right now is to pick a color that you generally like. Now there's a few things that are happening. Again, this area here on the neck isn't ideal for me. I don't like that color. I don't necessarily like the colors that are presented on the collarbone or some of the shoulders and the chest area because There's a lot of variation happening. It does seem like a neutral color, and it's not a problem. It might be fine, but for now, let's avoid this area entirely. Let me select somewhere on the forehead for now. And again, this is all temporary, so in case you don't like your selection, we can come back and change it in a minute. I'll click on the forehead. Once you click on the forehead, you see over here that you've defined the color that you like. Now, the next step first is under uniformity, there is a hue slider. So the hue slider itself means that the color that you picked, which is the dot over here, and the surrounding colors that are on tangent to the color you selected, so anything more yellow or red influenced, which is usually this entire skin range. And I know this because if I clicked view selected color range, you can see everything in saturation is the one that's selected. Now, if I go ahead and move the uniformity slider here, and let's go all the way to 100 for maximum effect. And we're not gonna do this, but let me just show you. You notice that everything now is identical with that hue. So I've picked the forehead color, but the color on the neck is identical, the color on the lips is identical. Everything changed except the eyes. Even it did some of the hair as well, because the hair had similar tones in it. Now it shows you how powerful it is because it really does take everything that's on a tangent to the color you selected and brings it all to the color you selected. So when I turn that off, you see everything has gone back to normal. And I go all the way to the left, to the right, and you see everything's gone to the color that I selected. The difference now remaining is the saturation. You see the neck is still more saturated. So just like we talked about earlier with the blank layer set to the hue blend mode, it takes the color and matches it, but it leaves the saturation, the original saturation of the destination area. It keeps it the same. So as the neck was originally very saturated, it kept that saturation present. So instead, what we'll do is if we did the saturation uniformity, what it does is it takes the saturation of the color you selected and makes everything that same saturation as well. This is really interesting. It splits it up because you can refine exactly what level of saturation you want different or what levels of color you want different, or hue as they call it. So let's dial it back a little bit. We'll dial back the hue. So if I dial back the hue all the way, we don't want that. We want something in the middle. And we dial back the saturation because we don't want everything similar in saturation completely. We want some differentiation so that it looks a little bit natural. So ultimately, we can leave a tiny bit of differentiation in the skin to fool people into believing it could be shot like that. Again, the theme being we want to deceive people, sadly, into believing that it could have been shot like that. That's the goal. For me, it isn't about total fakery. It's about keeping something really clean, but also quite believable in some aspects. So we've put this down about 50 on both sides. Let's do 50. Now, let's say that we want to change the color. We're like, okay, well, you know what? Everything's uniform, but I don't like the color. Well, it's easy to fix because over here it says amount. I can shift it. If I go left, it has influence to magenta. If I go right, it has influence to yellow or green. So if I pick something that's maybe closer to 1 or 2, I'll keep that for now, just because it looked a little bit more magenta overall. And again, that's just by eye. I don't have any reason or say into what exactly it should be. The easiest way to know is if you uncheck your layer, you'll see how close it was to most of the colors. Now, I noticed that maybe moving it to the right on the hue was probably not a good idea, so I'll keep it back to normal. When I turn the layer on and off, it pretty much matches everything, and the affected skin tones are adjusted. So take a look. I'm going to turn on and off. And take a look at the model on the left. Look at her neck. You see that the saturation, that green tint on her neck that was there, is fixed. And I only knew that it was green when I fixed it. I didn't know beforehand. I couldn't really tell just by looking at it. Even on the shoulder, there was a green cast. I didn't know that either. When you look at the shadows, it looked a bit muted. When you look at the forehead, there's more evening across the forehead as well. So that's awesome. So how can we take that and bring back some of the areas we don't want touched? Well, simply put, we can go into our eraser brush, right click, or just hold down, not right click, just hold down the icon, click on the eraser or erase mask, make your brush smaller. Let's zoom in a little bit. We can go here and we can increase or decrease the size. Make sure that your flow is adjusted accordingly. I'm going to keep my flow around 20-30%, just something not really slow like 2 or 3%, but in double digits. So 20% seems, nice where it's not too abrasive, it doesn't come too quickly, but I could brush it in. So if you think about it, 20% flow means if you do about 5 strokes, 5 times 20, you get to your destination. It's like your speed. So something really light. Next, we can also go into our settings and change it where you can change your opacity, but I'm not going to. My hardness and size is also there for me. Under this erase tool icon, you can say never display mask, only display mask when drawing so you know where you're painting. If I click on that, what it's going to do now is anytime I start painting, let's zoom in a little bit more. I'm not going to be 100% precise because, to be honest with you, the overall impact is not going to matter tremendously. So when I start brushing here, you'll see that red mask. It means it's affecting the whole image. Now I'm punching a hole through the mask when I'm using the eraser brush. And I'm doing a general job to show you that even a general job works. Well, that was a tongue twister. A general job does work. And if I turn this on and off, you'll see that it didn't impact much outside of the lip, so it's not a problem. And I'll go ahead and do that for the other images too, other part of the other lip over there. Just a really quick stroke there. There you go. So you can see I turn it on and off. Everything is fixed aside from the lips. Let's also fix the hair, because I don't want the hair to be affected, at least where it's visible. So I'm brushing it up here. Let's go down. We change our brush size with bracket keys. Just get down there. Again, I'm doing just a general brushing over. I'm not going to be 100% precise because it's not 100% necessary at the moment. And this is just for demonstration purposes. So let's go here. And because it has flow and size and hardness and all that, you can be as precise as you want. This area is in shadow, so it doesn't need to be masked back in. Let's do this back of the hair here. Now, we can also do the makeup. So I'm going to bring back the blush with my brush, eraser brush, and maybe even her cheeks over here, in case she had something. Let's also do the eye and eye makeup over here, like we mentioned before, because I don't want anything affected in the eye and eye makeup. Unless you do, then, well, by all means, you're free to do that as well. So there you have it. Let me turn that on and off. That's off. That's on. And you see that the neck itself was fixed. And now you can also go back into your color editor and push it even further. The hue is good. Let's bring some of that saturation down because I like that. I like a little bit of differentiation because I think subconsciously, when you look at people, sometimes you see different levels of saturation across the face and the body, but you don't register it. And you only register it when it's perfect and you're like, huh, something feels really off about that. And I'm kind of getting that vibe looking at the saturation levels. So let's keep some of that unevenness there. So that is, I'm really happy about that. It's something that I would probably use as well. Take a look at the neck. Let's just zoom in there. I want you to look at this neck. This is something you'd never say in real life. Let's look at that neck. Okay. You can see the variations in shade all being fixed. Just imagine how long that would take you to figure out by yourself if you had to do that manually. So there you have it. You can see everything is fixed except for the areas that are intended. So that is great. However, let's also take a quick look on how you can do in Photoshop as well. To do that, I'm going to quickly just reset this first one that we did. So it's left as is. I'll just use the arrow key up top. I'm going to quickly export this into Photoshop. Say desktop TIFF file. For now, it's fine because I'm going to just use TIFF file for my layering structure. I'm going to keep 8-bit for now because, to be honest with you, I'm not going to make any more color adjustments that are greatly impactful for the image. And for the most part, when I'm dealing with color work, 8-bit doesn't seem to matter so much compared to 16-bit if I don't change it a lot. If I do 16-bit, what happens is I am able to save a lot of the color and prevent banding and all of that. But for now, we'll keep it to 8. We'll export that. And when it opens into Photoshop, here is where I'm going to do this. Typically in this workflow, I'll save this after the dodge and burn and evening process. And the reason for that is it's just keeping it in line with the workflow we've been doing this entire time, where we have healing, dodge and burn, evening, color work, and so forth. So if I did this in Photoshop, the way that we would do this is I'll put a new folder, call it Color Fix. Now, as this is a unique example, I would first foremost try to get a sense of the colors that I like. And I'm gonna save them. The way that I'm gonna save them is I'm gonna go to Window, Swatches. Now under Swatches, I'm gonna take my color picker here. I'm gonna pick a really neutral highlight that I like. I kind of like this highlight on her head because it's a beige tone. So I'm gonna hit New. And I'll call this, it doesn't even have to be named because I know this as it's gonna pop up as a first bit over here. Let's close that tab group. Next, I'm gonna pick a mid-tone. Let's pick one on her forehead as well because it seems to be quite neutral. I'll hit a New as well. Next, I'll pick a shadow color that I like. Let's see, the darkest part of her forehead is gonna be over here. And then I'll hit New, okay. And now we have these 3 tones, which seems to be in a gradation between light to dark, and it matches some of the makeup applied apparently. Now we'll go into our gradient map, which we mentioned before as well. Except this time, I don't want you to freak out if this is the first time you're seeing gradient maps. The first step with a gradient map is let's go ahead and put the opacity of that layer to 0. Next, we're gonna click on this bar where we're gonna edit our colors. Here we have our gradient editor, which is gonna allow us to fix and map out some of these colors. So the first on the left, I'm gonna click on it. Then if I double click on that one, this is gonna be my shadow color. So I'll go ahead and click on this swatch over here. Hit OK. I'll do the same thing with my highlight. Click on the highlight color. Hit OK. Then I'll go into my midtones by adding a stop underneath the bar. When the hand icon appears, you can just simply add a stop. As many as you want. If you don't like them, just delete them by hitting delete. or dragging them off the bar. So my mid-tone color, I'll click on that. I'll hit OK. I realized my shadow color didn't register. I picked the wrong one. Click on that. Click on the shadow, hit OK. So now we have our three colors here. One thing I will do though, is I realized that the deepest color here on the shadows is actually a blacker color. So I'll just go and add another stop at the end, and I'll bring the selection a little bit lower, like that. So there's a proper gradation. Similarly, for my brightest color, I'll go over here. And again, this is all editable, so don't worry. I'll pick a really light version of that color. So now we have this really nice gradation and this gradient. I'll hit OK. Now I'm going to bring my opacity up to about 30%. But the last step, and the most important step, is going to switch this to hue. Now when I bring my opacity up, I turn that layer on and off. You notice that the evening seems to be similar. So this gradient is going to fix hue. So I'll name that. Let's actually close out this tab. Close tab group. And so we have some space. I'm going to bring this bar open. I'll call this hue fix. So hue is basically everything that fixes color except for saturation. So I'm keeping the saturation separately. That way we can fix saturation independently from the tone of the skin area. Because like I mentioned, it fixed the tone of the neck itself, but it kept the saturation of that green. The reason for that, like I mentioned, I'm going to do it separately. How do I do that separately? Well, very similarly, I'm just simply going to duplicate this hue fix, Command J, and then I'm going to bring that down and call it saturation. So here's where it gets really fun. Now, I'm going to bring that opacity down to 0 for a second. With this hue fix itself, I'm going to use this mask and then take a black brush or a brush set to the black pigment. And my flow is going to be 100 for now, just because I want to quickly show you. I'm going to brush back in the lips. And then, of course, the eyes. Any area that I don't want to impact it, basically. Let's bring my flow back to 20%. I'll bring the cheeks back. And then again, I'll do the lips on this side. I'll do the eyes. I'll do the eyebrows. I'll do the eye makeup as well. The hair, as I mentioned before, just really quickly going at it. And we'll leave the backdrop for now because it doesn't really matter. So that looks good. Except now we have a saturation issue, which is where this saturation gradient is going to come in. And I'm going to push it up like this, about 50%. Except now I'm not going to impact everything, just the areas that I want to fix. So I'll Command I, set with a black mask. And then now I'm simply going to brush over the neck. Let's see, maybe on this side we have differentiation. On the forehead, maybe even on that saturation. And so I turn these two on and off. You see the evening of all the skin tones. However, you'll notice that it's still not as precise as the one we did in the raw file. And the reason for that, again, is very simple. You have the raw data, which is much more refinedly modified over what's in Photoshop. And although you got something that's really close, the time that it took to do all that masking and all of that picking and sampling in Photoshop is a longer use of time, which is why I tend to try to do it in the raw stage. That way we can move on to other things, fixing skin and so forth in Photoshop after the fact. And I feel like it makes your retouching results much cleaner when you do it in the raw stage. Aside from that, I've mentioned other ways of using our color fix action layer here, where you see it says, let's see, touch, burn, color fix. And that was our blank layer set to color. And with that, if there's anything in a quick pinch you want to quickly modify, you're able to do so by simply picking the color that you like and brushing over areas. Except it's not as precise and you're kind of doing a lot of guesswork. It's not matching your shadows and highlights like your gradient map does. But it does a good job in a pinch. So you've seen at least multiple ways of doing it. You've seen simple ways of fixing color. You've seen ways to do it in the raw file. You've seen the gradient map method. And ultimately, those are the ways that I personally fix color. Now let's go on to our next topic where we talk about things like fixing hair, fixing skin, and getting into the overall retouching process as well.